there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome to reading Kojeve's Notion of Authority. This is our second video where today we're looking at pages 7 through 13, which deals with the first section, the analysis, right? The analysis. A is analysis, is B is going to be was it deductions? Is it analysis and deductions? A is analysis, B is deductions. And the book is divided into that aspect. It's divided in three threes, two sets of threes, of the preliminary remarks, the analysis, which has three sections: one, phenomenology analysis, metaphysical analysis, ontological analysis, and then B, deductions, which are political, ethical, and philosophical applications. Right, that's the structure of what we got from he said he'd do in the preliminary remarks. Now today's thing we're looking at focuses of analysis. We're looking at the phenomenological analysis, right? This is the phenomenological analysis. And we'll get into this. So, A, in order to be able to draw up the list of all authoritarian phenomena, in other words, he's playing on the term authority and authoritarian, right? Authoritarian phenomena. We must first select. We must first be selective with regard to the given phenomena, i.e., we have to be able to distinguish that distinguish phenomena that realize and reveals the essence of authority from those that have nothing to do with it, and sometimes despite appearances. So we have to look at the phenomena that relies and reveals the essence of authority rather than from those who have nothing to do with it. Right? In other words, we need to begin by providing a definition of authority, a general one, which can encompass all particular cases. Such a definition will be purely formal or nominal. Let us then look for a general theory of authority. General theory of authority. Dun, 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 dun. There is authority only where there is real, or at least possible, movement, change, and action. So there can only be authority where there is movement, change, and action. Authority is held only over those which can react. That is to say, that which can change according to what or who represents, or embodies, realizes, or exercises authority. So repeat that. In other words, authority is only in terms of movement, change, and action. Right? Where there's movement, no movement, no change, no action, no authority. Authority is held over those react. So authority is this thing that is held over those who react, and which can change according to what and who represents or embodies that authority, right? And quite obviously, authority belongs to the person who can effect change, and not to the one subjected to change. Authority is essentially active, not passive. So therefore, authority belongs to the one who effects action, not the one who is being affected by action. Therefore, it's active, not passive. Okay? The one who can affect change, not the one subject of the change. We can therefore say that the real support for any authority is necessary an agent in the proper and strong sense of the term. That is to say, an agent who is to be free in conscience. And so, either a divine being or a human being, an essential, and never something like an animal, for example. In other words, you have to have rationality, consciousness, and rationality. Nothing that is something that lacks consciousness or rationality. It must be free and conscious. In other words, not determined. Note, admittedly, the authoritarian act is not essentially spontaneous. It is possible to have authority while carrying out an order given by someone else. But the agent invested with authority is assumed to understand this order and accept it freely. A gramophone that transmits the word of a leader has no authority in itself. So therefore, in other words, an agent of authority that does so freely, willingly, versus one that doesn't do it freely is the gramophone. He has no authority. If I have no, if I play no agency in the transmission of this, I have no intrinsic. I do not. I have no authority. A gramophone has no authority. Okay, if I'm just the voice, I just merely the transmission of the authority of others that I do not add anything to it, then I have nothing. I am not authority in itself. The being invested with authority is then necessary, the agent. And the authoritarian act is always an absolute conscience free act. So, therefore, in other words, the act is always a conscious and free act. So, therefore, the agent, the being invested with authority is the agent, and the authoritarian act of the agent is always absolute conscious and free act, right? However, the authoritarian act is distinguished from all other acts by the fact that it does not encounter opposition from the person or persons towards whom it is directed. So, therefore, it's an act towards somebody that it does not encounter opposition from the person or persons towards which it's directed. That's interesting. This, in turn, presupposes both the possibility of opposing it and the conscious involuntary renunciation of realizing that possibility. So, therefore, this is the two things. You can oppose something that this act, this command, or this thing, this act directed towards this person, it is not. It is not, and does not encounter opposition from the person or persons towards whom it's directed. Now, there is the possibility that you can oppose it, but also there's the possibility of the conscious and voluntary renunciation of realizing this potential. Examples: if I throw someone out of the window, the fact that he falls has nothing to do with my authority, but I am exerting the manifest authority on him if he throws himself out of the window, following an order that I give him, and which materially he is in the position to choose not to carry out. The hypnotizer has no authority over the person he hypnotizes. I do not need to exercise my authority to make someone do what he feels like doing and would have done even without me telling him to do it. I do not need to exercise my authority to make someone do what he feels like doing, and he would have done without my telling him to do it. Okay, that's very interesting. It's the hypnotized person is not authority. If you hypnotize, you're going to do it anyways. Do it, you know. It has to be a possibility of saying no to it. And that's why it has to have this duality of the possibility of saying no, while at the same time the opposite possibility of consciously and voluntarily renunciating that possibility. Okay. So therefore, throwing out a window is not authority. That's something that one does, right? That's an action, but that's not authority. Me telling him to jump out the window and that he does so, not because he wants to do it, uh, 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 um, or that he's inclined to do it, but that he does it because I told him to do it, and that he is free to say no. Okay? Authority is necessary a relation between agent and patient. That is an essentially social rather than individual phenomenon. There have to be at least two in order for authority to exist. Therefore, there needs to be the authority only operates in the social relationship between people. It's social. It's not just there's no authority in terms of an individual in itself, unless we divide the individual's brain up And the ancients do this with this. He divides the human being up into forces like reason, passion, spirit, courage, and that these things are, and there has to be some ordering of them, and one must have authority over the other to do and control the other. But that's that. But he is not going that far. There have to be two in order for authority to exist. Therefore, authority is the possibility that an agent has of acting on others or on another without those reacting against him, despite being capable of doing so. Or again, by acting with authority. Well, let's stop for a second. Let's stop. See, therefore, let's say if I do things like I force, authority is only possible in a social relationship where people are free to act, right? Therefore, when the ant queen, gives orders to the other ants, to the army ants, go fight this and do that, or then you're going to be the worker ant doing this, they have no control. They can't say no. They have no a situation where I have power that I emanate a command and you cannot say no to negates the possibility of authority. Kojeve argues. That's interesting. So this is an existential. In other words, that's what force is. Force, physical force, negates that concept. There's no possible, if the physical act of force. That's why me physically taking someone, throwing out the window, that's an act of force. That's not an act of authority, he's saying. Okay, now let's continue. Um, or again, by acting with authority, the agent can change the outward human given without suffering a repercussional from that action, a repercussion from that action, i.e., without himself changing as a result of the action. So in other words, I cause an action, but I'm not. But there's no repercussion from the action in that sense. That I'm not going to. It's not going to have an impact on me to change. Well, um, I'm. This is where maybe it's more complex. Maybe not directly or immediately, but the effects of the action can have situations which change, which I then look at it and it changes my perspective of something. But that's a different issue. Um, Example: if in order to make someone get out of my room, I have to use force, I have to change my own behavior to realize the act in question. And I show through this behavior that I have no authority. Things are completely different if I do not move and this person leaves the room. That is to say, changes as a result of me simply saying, get out. If the given order provokes a discussion, that is to say, forces one who gives it to do something himself, namely engages in a discussion as a function of the order, then there's no authority. So I have to, if I have to get, okay, this is even more interesting. Um, and even less so if the discussion leads to giving up the order or even a compromise. That is to say, precisely to changing the act that was supposed to provoke an outward change without changing itself. So, okay, this is even more interesting at this point. He's saying that no discussion. In other words, you just do it. Obedience. You abide. The second there is a situation of discussion, then that's a challenge. Now they might do it, therefore it's not a complete challenge. It might be a discussion, and you then persuade them. But then this is not an unconditional obedience. So authority, the idea of authority here, is that command followed by obedience, in Kojeve's understanding. that there's obedience. And this obedience is not merely done through force. That's the negation of this. And compromise is not it either. That if there's a compromise, then there's no authority per se. And I think this is the difference. This is what that deliberation. In other words, this is interesting. I would argue, okay, he's not. This is about commands. Really, what he's talking about is a command. Someone has given a command, and this command is an act. An agent has given a command. Now, how that command has been made is not an issue of authority. It can be an issue of deliberation, discussion, compromise. But in terms of the command, that then someone you have to negotiate it and then compromise to achieve the command. Then there's no authority. That's not, they're not doing out of authority. They're doing out of interest. They're not doing it because they're not doing it because they have agreed to obey, and they have not opposed. They're opposing and they're negotiating. So, in other words, there's no negotiation here for authority. It's obedience. Or again, finally, authority has the possibility of acting without making compromises in the broadest terms, in the broadest sense of the term. So that, in other words, authority is the possibility of acting. It's acting, not deliberating, not deciding. This is what I think maybe is. This is where he are not talking about the same thing. He is talking about the political, and that's talking about a decision. This is coming after a decision. Authority comes. It's after the decision. It's tied. This is what the authority to get others to do things, to carry out the decision, the act. No, in any case, any discussion is already a compromise because it boils down to this: do such and such a thing unconditionally. No, I shall do it on a condition that you do this other thing, namely, you convince me. All right, point granted. Okay. In other words, you haven't been obedient. In other words, all right, point granted. I convinced you. Therefore, a discussion implies deliberation. If there's deliberation involved, it's no longer just or a compromise. Even discussions a compromise. There's a compromise. It's not just saying, let's do this and execute this. Then there's a lack of authority in that sense. But what happens if you get it? Now there is a compromise, but even if it is persuading them, is that if I have to persuade you, that is maybe that you lack authority, that they lack authority. And that's interesting. That Kojeve is saying here, maybe this is the point, that if the second you have to negotiate, every single system is negotiation, then there's the absence of authority. Is liberal society a world where that there's an absence of authority or a minimal aspect of authority? That is an interesting point. Now let's go see. I don't want to go too far. I said that the problem here, the pages here don't correspond to the pages here. Okay, to number 2. So I'm reading number 2. So therefore, B. This definition clearly shows that the phenomena of authority is related to the phenomena of right. Short article on right. Okay, this is the weird thing. Was a short article on right. Is referring primarily to a study which will become his outline for a phenomenology of right. Okay, but that's okay. The outline that would become his philosophy. Right? That would be an interesting thing to see. The fact, in fact, I have a now. Right means what is just, what is thing. Philosophy of right. What is right means what is correct, what is true, but also what is just. Right. I have a right to something when I can do it without encountering an opposition reaction. The latter being in principle possible. So, in other words, for example, if I want to take from someone 100 francs which belongs to him, he will react. I will suffer the repercussions of my act. But if he owes me this money, i.e., if I have the right over him, I don't have to suffer any reaction when my action transfers the 100 francs from his pocket to mine. There is nevertheless an essential difference between these two related phenomena. Okay, right, and authority are not the same thing. They're related. They are related to it. In other words, if I have a right to something, when I can do it without emancipate encountering opposition, right? This when I have a right to something. When it's just this is there is nevertheless an essential difference between these two related phenomena. In the case of authority, the reaction or opposition never exceeds the sphere of pure possibility. It is never actualized. The realization destroys authority, so that the opposition is only a possibility, a pure possibility that's never actualized. Its realization destroys authority. With right, on the contrast, the reaction can be actualized without destroying right. All that is needed is for this reaction to be directed against the person other than the one who has the right. In the above example, the violent reaction of the debtor needs only be directed against the judge, bailiff, or police officer, and so on. What follows from this distinction is that if in principle authority excludes force, right implies and presupposes force while being something different from it. There is no right without the court of law, no court without police that can carry out the distinctions by the court of force. So right can work with force. Authority excludes force. This is very interesting. Authority excludes force in that sense. Very interesting idea here. Furthermore, the relationship between authority and right explains why every authority necessarily has a legal or legitimate character in the eyes of those who recognize it, which goes without saying, since any authority is necessary a recognized authority. Not to recognize an authority is to negate it and thereby destroying it. So therefore, this idea there is a connection between authority and right. Because the idea if you exercise that, the people are going to comply, recognize the legitimacy of it, that it's legal and legitimate character. If they don't recognize the legitimacy, they would oppose it and therefore negate the authority. Okay, that's what he's saying here. I have an issue: coercion, force, physical force. But what about threats of force, or the threat of force and fear? What about fear? That is something we'd have to look at the question. What is about fear? He said that you cannot use force, but what about the threat of force or the possibility that force could be used on you? In other words, that it's not just merely the act of force. Maybe the act of force neglects it, but what about the presence of force, the mere presence of force, and the possibility of it possibly being used if you oppose? This is underneath the thing, right? This is the idea. I have the power. In other words, it differs. In other words, I think it would greatly differ between someone powerful and something powerless. The reaction by people will differ greatly whether they will comply with a command, right? But but there is force there behind it. The possibility of it, not the which is, or maybe even not even the direct, that the mind of the actor has the possibility that that force could be used, while the other actor looks at that and there's no possibility of force. Okay, But then what happens to authority then in that regard, in this model? That's something we should think about for a second, right? But let's continue. Therefore, by exerting the authority, it is not something, in other words, one, therefore, one, exerting an authority is not only something different from using force, violence, but the two phenomena are mutually exclusive. So, authority and violence are mutually exclusive. Generally speaking, one needs to do nothing in order to exert authority. The mere fact of being compelled to call on the intervention of force proves that no authority is invoked here. Okay, but let's stop here. Let's say I'm not going to convoke, but the perception in the mind of the person, perceiving that force will be used if you say no, and the realization that the other that they have relative power, they lose. Therefore, fear of that force happening may be the reason why they're complying. That it's not really totally as free as maybe Kojeve is saying here, or insisting on here. Or then that's not real authority, that only voluntary authority. But how do we know the mind of the person? Is it doing freely? Or is there a process in behind their mind of interest that that there is a decision in the actor? The actor, how they respond, may be saying, it's not, it doesn't benefit. Does it benefit me or not benefit me? Can I win? Is this threatening? If I oppose, is the cost benefit of this is not, okay, this is what I mean. Yes, there's an aspect of psychology here, but at another level, something's missing here, okay? There is this existential authority of this, but then what about this? But negating force completely would we have to get into the mind. It has to be free. How do we know it's free? Right? Um, Generally speaking, one needs to do nothing other than assert authority. The mere fact of being compelled to call on the intervention of force or violence proves that no authority is involved here. Consequently, it is not possible without using force. Consequently, it is not possible without using force to make people do what they would not have done spontaneously or on their own accord without calling upon the intervention of authority. Now, listen. Conversely, it is not possible without using force. Okay, so to make people what they would not have done spontaneously or of their own accord without the invention of authority. Okay, no. If someone does what I ask him to do out of love of me, he does it spontaneously because he would do anything to please me without having to intervene or act on him. The relation of love is therefore essentially different from the relation of authority. But wait a minute. Okay. It is different from the relation of authority. But since love produces the same result as authority, we can easily make a mistake by conflating the two phenomena and say that the beloved has an authority over the lover, or that the person subject to authority, that is recognizing it, has a love for it. This leads to an explanation of the natural human propensity to love, to love the one who has authority. One recognizes the love to have authority, to love the one whose authority one recognizes, as well as recognizing the authority of the one loves. But the two phenomena remains clearly distinct. So this is interesting. He wants to distinguish between love. I have love, and that the rest that it versus authority. That therefore the fact that love, I have an affection for that person who will do what they want, or affection to that thing, or that group, or that order, or the dear leader. In other words, if I have love for the dear leader, um, or the charismatic concern, the charisma, the leader, or charisma. Charisma does therefore that would evoke what Kojeve is doing here is suggesting that um, it's repudiating Weber in a sense of authority. In other words, Weber would argue that there's three sets of authority. That is tradition, things like tradition or custom, rational legalism, and then um, charisma. Right? That was that three famous character of authority or even herrenship, leadership. Um, but let's think about this for a second. That would deny that. That's love. Isn't charisma is kind of a love, an affection towards, a feeling towards. So there is some there. I think, and I think love is a kind of is tied to authority in that sense, but it's not the whole of authority. Love and fear. This is my thing. Love and fear. Love and fear is the engines that does authority. He wants to assert that he's fundamentally different. I might suggest they're not fundamentally different. That rather, what he says is a distinct thing is perhaps the engine underneath that creates the thing that he talks about. Um, so, therefore, this leads to the expression of natural propensity of love, the one authority as well as one recognizes, as well as the authority of the one loves. But the two phenomena remains clearly distinct. Two, legal legal or legitimate action can also be authoritarian. That is needed for this. All that is needed for this to be so is the actualization of possible reactions, freely in conscience renounced. So therefore, that the legal and legitimate actions, can be acts of authoritarian action. All that is needed for this is to be that the actualization of possible reactions is freely and consciously renounced. In this case, right exerts an authority while remaining a right insofar as there is force capable of realizing this right. If need arises, that is to say, if right ceases to exercise its authority. In short, right has authority only for those who recognize it, but it remains right even for those who are subject to it without recognizing it. So right is right. Right can rely on force. Authority cannot rely on force. He's saying. Okay, then that's why it can't rely on love. Love and fear. For an authoritarian action, it is defined. It is by definition legal or legitimate, because where the possible reaction does not materialize, that to say, if there's no reaction whatsoever, there is an a fortiori, no reaction against the agent himself. In other words, just no. Okay, let's look at. So I already know I know what it means, but let's go. Let's do this for the sake of everyone knows what it means. My Latin is bad. It used to be better, but from the stronger, right? I'm from the stronger. There is a stronger, no reaction against the agent himself. Consequently, it is meaningless. It contra in ejecto. I think that is. Let's do this. Let's look it up. In ejecto, in addition to, right? In addition, its contradiction is in addition to speak of an illegitimate or illegal authority. In other words, its contradiction is in addition to speak of an illegitimate or illegal authority. The person who recognizes an authority and there is no unrecognized authority recognizes by the same token its legitimacy. To deny the legitimacy of authority is not to recognize it. In other words, by this very act, to destroy it. The essence of an authority can therefore, in a concrete way, be denied, but no right can be opposed to a real authority. That is to say, recognize authority. Okay. Once you recognize something, it's right. That's consent. That's the Locke. That's the Hobbesian conception of consent makes right. Right. Consent makes right, or at least legitimize right. In other words, authority legitimize authority. Not it's not consent makes right. Consent makes authority. No consent, no authority. Note 1. Many authors, and particularly Christians, have stated that all political power is legitimate. This is true only as far as power embodies an authority. So power embodies an authority. However, we shall see later on that there is a possible dissociation between power and authority. A power devoid of authority is not necessarily legitimate. We can certainly say that any revolutionary action directed against a power invested with authority would be illegal and illegitimate. But this is a meaningless tautology, in as much as authority precisely excludes all actions directed against it. So therefore, revolution is always illegitimate in this sense and illegal against a power invested with authority. But a power devoid of authority is not necessarily legitimate. Okay, with revolutionary power, right? This is the revolutionary power. Note 2: it can be said that legally it is the cadaver of authority. Legality is the cadaver, the body, right? The husk of authority, or more the precisely, its mummy, the corpse that endures while being deprived of the soul of life. So law, that authority is there, and that the law is the husk, the mummy of that lifeless thing that is there. 3. Our definition of authority can also be seen as close to the only general valid definition of the divine. That is, for me, anything that can act on me without me having the possibility of reacting to it. Example: so long as men assumed that the stars exerted an influence on them and thought that they had no means to act upon a star, they deified them. But when they learned from Newton that every physical action is equal to the reaction it provokes, the stars and all the natural world in general were permanently disenchanted. Okay, once you had no influence on it. Enchantment requires the ability to enchant. But isn't that? But come on, love, enchantment, right? Enchantment and love, right? This divine aspect, love. But how you're getting into love, authority and love. I think authority, Mr. Kojeve, you can't divide authority and love like you're doing here. This definition explains why men, on the one hand, has always attributed the summa of authority to that which has or represented from him the divine, and on the other hand has endowed all existing human authority, that is to say, that recognized by him, with a sacred or divine character. See theocratic theory of authority discussed below, which maintains the divine authority of all divine origin of all authority, right? Divine authority of all authority. However, the definition of divine differs from that of authority. In the case of divine action, human reaction is absolutely impossible. In the case of human authoritarian action, reaction is, on the contrary, necessary possible. But one does not happen owing to the consciousness and voluntary renunciations of this possibility. But one but does not happen owing to the conscience and voluntary renunciation of this possibility. So, in other words, the divine, it's absolutely impossible. But in the case of human reaction, it's possible. Interesting. We can modify our definition of authority in such a way that it encompasses divine action. by saying that human or divine or human action is authoritarian insofar as it does not provoke any reaction. We can then speak about a divine authority, but it will nevertheless have to be carefully distinguished from human authority, which presupposes not only the absence of a real reaction, but also the presence of the potential reaction, of the possibility of reaction. We prefer, however, to keep our definition of authority. We keep our definition of authority, even if we have to say that it is essentially human social phenomena, with divine action being only related to the authoritarian action and not identical to it. So it's related to authority, but it's not identical. But it's also possible to say that that in contrast to authority, strictly speaking, that is to say, human authority, divine authority is essentially unassailable. Every possibility of reacting being excluded. Authority must be exerted indefinitely as long as the being who embodies it exists. However, seeing that by definition this being cannot be modified, that is to say, damaged and ultimately destroyed from outside, it is natural to suppose that it exists eternally. It is also possible to say that divine authority differs from human authority, strictly speaking, insofar as it is eternal. Or to put it differently, the divine the divine exerts all authority without any risk of losing it, without any risk at all. Yeah, but then again, wait a minute. That's so what? Yeah, come on, think what I'm saying. The believer doesn't believe anymore. Once the believer doesn't believe anymore, then the authority of God is no longer. Hey, Mr. Atheist, you should know this. The atheism point is that if I don't believe anymore, I don't accept the authority. I accept the authority because I believe. I mean, this is a great thing, but I'm seeing, doing this with you guys, or girls, and whoever's doing this. I'm seeing the holes in it more now than I saw when I read it myself. That's why talking things through like this sometimes with other people sometimes shows us the things. But talking it, in other words, reading it, sometimes you don't understand something. Sometimes when you're talking it, then you see it, you hear it, and then hearing it all of a sudden points out things you that your mind didn't grab immediately sometimes. And here I'm seeing something here, and that is this problem of he's trying to distinguish it, but is it distinguishable as he wants? He's creating a distinguishing thing. And I understand why he's doing it because he wants to keep the idea of a choice-free extension, the free to say no. But there is still the free to say. He doesn't need realize that there is still the free to say no because by belief. If one does not believe, then one's going to probably say, "Hey, I'm not going to accept your authority." So it does do what it says it does. That now he says it doesn't. Doesn't? Why doesn't he understand this? What's going on? Why doesn't he catch this? And given that he's an atheist, he is an atheist, Kojeve. Um, or maybe he's not an atheist. I mean, he always talk about atheism in this sense, but I don't see how an atheist not have understood the question of divine authority being questioned or being challenged, right? So that there's no risk at all, right? There's not losing it at all. Come on, if I don't believe it, I don't. I'm not going to accept the authority. I'll say no. Human authority, by contrast, is perishable. At any moment, the voluntary repressed possibility of reacting may be actualized, and thus no authority. Well, again, belief. I lose belief. I cease believing. The exercise of human authority, therefore, necessarily implies an element of risk to the person who exerts it by the very fact that he's exerting it. He is exerting it. So the authority therefore implies an element of risk to the person who exerts it by the fact that he's exerting it, albeit nothing more than the risk of losing it. with all that ensues from this loss. In other words, everything else I follow. I give an order. It's going to be that. And there's going to be. I lose the authority, and with that authority, I don't get you. It's not the what I order you to do, command you to do. You're not doing. That might have effect. And consequently, every human authority that exists must have a cause, a reason or justification for its existence, a reason of being, reason to that, right? To note that it exists is not itself sufficient for recognizing it, and that and by that very fact prolongs its existence. So there, it must every act human authority has to have a reason, a justification, right? A reason, a cause, a reason, justification for its being, right? Reason for being. We shall therefore have to see what the causes, reasons, and justifications of authority are. And this study will allow us to distinguish between the different irreducible types of authority and better understand the proposed theories that are linked to it. Now, this is where we're going to stop. This stops our thing here because this is where the next page I was going to cut off. I was going to do just the first one today of the part A, part one. A, just do one. So that's it. I'll stop here. It's a good time. If you have any comments or questions, please put them down there and below. And when I see them, I'll respond to them. If you've liked it, like the post, please like it. If you have any, if you have not only like it, but forward it on social media, forward it to your friends, spread the news. Second thing you can do is if you have not subscribed, please subscribe. Get others to subscribe. Now, if you didn't like it, you can subscribe also, but I don't think you're gonna maybe even leave me. Oh no, don't leave me, don't leave me. But say why you're objecting. You don't think your guy's bad. Maybe we can learn. Maybe there's something wrong. Maybe the fan is too loud. Trust me, I need the fan right now. This place is like it's warm out here, but there's no air. um, So I can correct it. There's something I can do. Fine. Next thing. Next thing. Um, um, those of you who want to follow me on social media, links are below. If you want to help, you can always send a check. We're doing this for free, so I'm not. No one's paying me to do this in that sense. So therefore, it would be good. So that if you're not going to bother sending me a check or a donation, you could always do Patreon or Subscribestar. I should set up a PayPal someplace. You can do it there. No, but I haven't figured out how to do this kind of stuff yet. What to do about this? Okay. Next point here is you can buy my books that are listed below. Also, you want to help, you can buy my books. You can join Subscribestar, Patreon, or you can buy one of my books or buy it for a friend or things like that. That is a way to help. With that, we end. We'll continue as we continue this next time we do this. Again, we post these on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We will look at page 13 to 28. Okay? Well, take care. Bye-bye, and so long. Have a good day.